While I was visiting my friend Sylvie for Maker Faire Paris, she introduced me to the basics of ball turning. And since I love combining crafts, I set out to make a yarn ball. We started with a cherry log that Sylvie cut into a blank for me. I removed the bark with a chisel and we mounted it on the lathe. To get started, we mounted the blank between two centers. The first step is to rough the ball into a round shape. This can be a little bit tricky because the weight is distributed unevenly and the inconsistent shape makes it easy to catch your tool on the wood. So I took it slow and removed only a little bit of material at a time. I also took this opportunity to practice my tool positioning. Once the blank was round, it became a lot easier to work with. We cut an angled tenon on what will be the bottom of the ball, so that we can mount it in the chuck for a better grip. But I still added a tailstock for extra support. Now I could flatten the top of the ball and cut a mortise on this side for the chuck to grab into. I mounted the ball back in the original position, but this time using the chuck and the tailstock. Now I could focus on making the shape that I want the ball to be. Since it's going to be a yarn ball, I want a nice smooth curve and a top edge that curves inwards a little bit, so that the yarn doesn't roll out. I'm still pretty new to wood turning and mistakes happen. And unlike spindle turning, ball turning has the added issue of different grain directions all the way around, and that complicates things further. The tool can catch on the wood, it can slide off to the side, or get accidentally bounced off the wood. All those things happen. At this stage, those mistakes are still fixable, since I can just remove a bit more material until the surface is smooth again. It does mean I had to go with the flow a little bit, accepting that I can't entirely control the final result. When I was happy with the shape, it was time for sanding. This is a lot easier to do while the piece is still mounted on the lathe, since you can just let the lathe do the work for you. I worked my way through the grids and used this handy little sandpaper holder. It turns the rotation of the piece into a spinning movement, and that way you don't end up sending lines into the surface. I rubbed on some alcohol in between the grids. This raises any fibers that are already damaged or almost loose, so that you can sand them off completely. When the outside of the ball was done, I turned it around and started on the inside. In the beginning, I used the tailstock for extra support, but when I moved towards the bottom of the ball, I relied on just the chuck. I found that removing the material from the inside of the ball was a lot trickier than the outside. Finding the right angle for the tool and positioning it properly was challenging, especially with the changing curvature towards the bottom and that inwards curve at the top. Like with the outside, I took my time, practiced my tool positioning, and I gradually felt more in control. Although catches definitely still happened. To prevent any issues, I made sure to keep my tools very sharp, and that's good advice for any turning project anyway. Sylvie had her grinder set up right next to the lathe, so there was really no excuse not to sharpen the tools often. Towards the end, the process became increasingly nerve-wracking, because with the wall thickness this thin, there's a good chance that a bad catch will just crack the ball or go right through. Thankfully, I'd gotten all that practice in when I was removing the rest of the inside. In the end, I did end up cutting through the ball. I had trouble keeping my wall thickness consistent, and since the wood wasn't dry, it had warped slightly overnight, meaning it wasn't entirely round anymore. But that last thing probably also ended up saving me, because I only went through the ball on one side. After the initial disappointment, I figured I could simply make the cutout for the yarn on that side and hide my crime. I carefully finished shaping the bottom of the ball, doing my best to leave the thin area alone. Then I proceeded to sand the inside as well. Back home, I used my Dremel to make the cutout. I tried several different bits, but in the end it was easiest to just drill a series of holes with the drill bit and then remove the material in between them. I sanded the cutout smooth and gave the whole bowl a final pass with very fine sanding paper. Finally, I applied finish to it. I used my homemade beeswax and linseed oil finish and I rubbed it on with an old dish towel. The grain on this cherry is gorgeous and I am so very pleased with how this bowl turned out. I took a bit of a risk making it this thin, especially since it's my first bowl, but I think it really paid off. Now I can knit without my ball of yarn rolling away, falling on the floor and collecting all the dust it can possibly find. And I get to add another handmade tool to my collection, and I love that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.